In the spring of 1946, the quiet border town of Texarkana was gripped by terror. In less than 3 months, 4 brutal crimes shook the community to its core. 3 attacks targeted young couples parked along lovers' lanes on the Texas side of town. The 4th struck across the border in Arkansas, a middle-aged couple gunned down inside their farmhouse. By the end of the spree, 5 people were dead. 3 more had barely survived, and the traumatized survivors could offer police little to identify their attacker. Fear spread like wildfire. Wealthy women gathered their children and checked into downtown's Hotel Grim whenever their husbands were away.
The incredible story you are about to see is true.
The legend of Texarkana's Phantom Killer fascinated America for decades. Eventually, it was immortalized on the silver screen.
What'd you do that for?
I heard something.
A film called The Town That Dreaded Sundown mangled the story as only Hollywood can. But the basics were there: a hooded serial killer stalking young couples on lovers' lanes. That part is true, and the conclusion as well. The Phantom Killer got away with it. No one was ever charged.
Families built makeshift security systems, pots and pans strung to wire around their homes. Parents who had never owned firearms now slept with loaded pistols on their nightstands, their children pulled close on the bedroom floor. Lawmen from Texas and Arkansas swarmed the streets, joined by reporters from across the country. The manhunt consumed Texarkana. The killer was faceless, nameless, and everywhere at once. And soon, he would be given a name that still haunts the town to this day: the Phantom Killer. On Friday night, February 22, 1946, 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Mary Jean Larry, parked on a secluded lover's lane just outside Texarkana after a night at the movies. At around 11:55 p.m., their quiet evening turned into a nightmare. A figure suddenly appeared at the driver's side window, a man wearing a white cloth mask, like a pillowcase with eye holes crudely cut out. He shone a flashlight into the car and growled, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." Hollis and Larry were afraid. They had no option but to comply. The masked man ordered them both out of the car. Turning his attention to Hollis, he barked, "Take off your GDDM and breeches." When Hollis complied, the man struck him twice across the skull with a pistol. The sound was so sharp and violent that Larry thought he had been shot. In reality, she had just heard his skull fracture. Larry tried to reason with the attacker, showing him Hollis's wallet to prove they had no money. But instead of leaving, the masked man struck her too. Then, he gave a chilling command. He ordered her to run. At first, she tried to escape toward a ditch. But the Phantom wasn't finished. From behind her came another order, this time telling her to run up the road. It was only the beginning of Texarkana's reign of terror. Terrified and disoriented, Mary Jean Larry spotted an old car parked off the road. Hoping to find help, she rushed toward it, only to discover it was empty. Moments later, the masked attacker confronted her again. "Why are you running?" he demanded. When she reminded him that he had ordered her to flee, he called her a liar, then knocked her to the ground and assaulted her with the barrel of his gun. After the brutal attack, Mary Jean managed to break free. She ran nearly half a mile through the dark countryside before reaching a farmhouse, where she woke the residents and called the police. Meanwhile, Jimmy Hollis regained consciousness. Bleeding and dazed from his fractured skull, he staggered to the roadside and managed to flag down a passing motorist, who also contacted authorities. Within 30 minutes, Bowie County Sheriff Bill Presley and his deputies were on the scene. But the Phantom was gone. Mary Jean was treated overnight for head wounds, while Hollis spent days in the hospital recovering from multiple skull fractures. The young couple gave investigators slightly different accounts of their attacker. Larry believed she could see beneath the mask that he was a light-skinned African-American man. Hollis, blinded by the flashlight, thought the assailant was a tan white man, maybe around 30 years old. Both agreed, however, that the Phantom stood about 6 feet tall. But instead of clarity, their testimony only deepened suspicion. Law enforcement repeatedly challenged Larry's account and even suggested the two were hiding the identity of someone they already knew. The town of Texarkana was left with more questions than answers, and the Phantom was still out there. People had no idea that he was just getting started. On Sunday morning, March 24, 1946, another grim discovery was made. A passing motorist noticed a car parked on a lover's lane, just off Highway 67 in Bowie County. Inside was a scene of horror. 29-year-old Richard Griffin was found between the front seats, slumped forward on his knees, his head resting on his crossed hands. His pockets had been turned inside out. In the back seat, his girlfriend of 6 weeks, 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore, lay sprawled face down. Both victims had been shot once in the back of the head. Griffin had been shot twice more while still inside the car. Blood evidence suggested they were killed outside on a blanket, then placed back inside. Congealed blood pooled along the running board and leaked through the bottom of the car door. A single .32 caliber cartridge casing was recovered near the scene, possibly fired from a pistol wrapped in a blanket. Though rumors spread through Texarkana that Polly Ann had been sexually assaulted, later reports dismissed the claim. What was clear was that the Phantom had struck again, escalating his reign of terror, and the town's fear was only beginning to grow. They had no clue that within a few weeks, the Phantom would strike again. In the early hours of Sunday, April 14, 1946, 16-year-old Paul Martin picked up his friend, 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker, after her performance with a local band at the VFW Club in Texarkana. By dawn, their night had ended in tragedy. At 6:30 a.m., Martin's body was discovered lying by the edge of North Park Road. He had been shot 4 times, once through the nose, once in the ribs from behind, once in the right hand, and once through the back of the neck. Blood spattered across the opposite side of the road, near a fence, suggested he had fought desperately to survive. Hours later, searches found Betty Jo Booker's body nearly 2 miles away. She lay behind a tree, posed on her back with her right hand tucked neatly into the pocket of her overcoat. She had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the face. The weapon was the same .32 caliber Colt automatic used in the earlier murders. Martin's car was discovered abandoned 3 miles away, the key still in the ignition. Authorities could not determine which victim had been killed first, but the evidence was clear. Both teenagers had put up a fierce struggle. Friends insisted the pair had no enemies, no grudges. They were simply in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The Phantom Killer had claimed 2 more lives. Many hoped that he would have stopped by now, but one more attack would take place after a few weeks. On Friday, May 3, 1946, the Phantom Killer struck again, this time not on a lover's lane, but inside the safety of a family home. 37-year-old Virgil Stark sat in his armchair reading the newspaper in his farmhouse, 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. Without warning, 2 shots tore through a closed window, striking him in the back of the head. Virgil staggered to his feet, then collapsed back into his chair dead. His wife, 36-year-old Katie Starks, rushed in from another room at the sound of breaking glass. Before she could react, 2 more bullets ripped through the window, striking her in the face. Blinded by her own blood but still conscious, Katie stumbled toward the bedroom, reaching for a pistol. She heard the killer circling the house. Realizing she had no time, she fled out the front door, barefoot and bleeding. Katie ran across the road to her sister's house, but no one was home. She continued on to a neighbor, gasping the words, "Virgil's dead," before collapsing. Her neighbors rushed her to the hospital, where she was questioned from the operating table by Sheriff W.E. Davis, who would lead the investigation. Against all odds, Katie survived. The Starks' attack sent shockwaves through Texarkana. No longer were the Phantom's victims only young couples in secluded places. Now, he had struck inside a family's home, proving that no one was safe. People began living in terror. Nobody knew when he would strike again, but after his attack on the Starks, the Phantom stopped. The investigation of Texarkana Moonlight Murders wasn't easy. From the very beginning, law enforcement cast doubt on Mary Jean Larry's account of the first attack. Officers believed that she and Jimmy Hollis knew their assailant and were protecting his identity. After the Griffin Moore murders, Larry returned to Texarkana, hoping to help investigators connect the cases. But instead of support, she faced more suspicion. The Texas Rangers challenged her story, insisting she was withholding the truth. For weeks, authorities refused to publicly link the Hollis-Larry attack with the later murders. They didn't think these two cases were connected. Treating them as isolated incidents slowed down the investigation. In fact, they weren't making much progress in the first place. It wasn't until May 11th, one day after the Texarkana Gazette published an interview with Larry, that officials finally appealed to the public, urging them to report anyone who had been suspiciously absent during the nights of the killings. But it was too late. By then, the Phantom had already claimed more lives. In the wake of the Griffin Moore murders, law enforcement launched a massive citywide manhunt. The investigation brought together officers from both Texas and Arkansas, the Texas Rangers, local sheriff's departments, and even the FBI. Over 200 people were questioned. Just as many false leads were chased down. In the Martin Booker case, investigators worked in shifts around the clock, interrogating friends, acquaintances, and suspects. Texas Ranger Manuel Gonzalez even staged elaborate traps, recruiting teenagers to sit as decoys in parked cars, while officers hid nearby. At times, mannequins were used to lure the Phantom out of the shadows. After the Starks farmhouse attack, the effort only intensified. Roadblocks went up along Highway 67 East. Drivers in the area that night were detained and questioned. By May 5th, 47 officers were working the case. Police even released a photograph of a flashlight found at the Starks crime scene, the first color photo ever printed by the Texarkana Gazette, and urged the public to report anyone who owned one like it. Days later, reinforcements arrived. 20 Arkansas State Police officers and a fleet of 10 patrol cars, each equipped with two-way radios. A mobile command center was set up. By May 11th, a teletype machine was installed in the Bowie County Sheriff's Office to link investigators across the region in real time. Despite the effort, the killer remained elusive. Officers began to speculate about motive. With money left untouched in the Starks' home and Katie's purse ignored, many concluded the murders were not about robbery at all, but driven by something darker, what they called sex mania. By the end of March, police turned to the public for help. They offered a $500 reward, worth more than $8,000 today, for any information that might break the case. But instead of answers, it brought over 100 false leads, each one raising hopes only to collapse into dead ends. After the brutal murders of Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, the reward fund began to swell. Families, businesses, and even strangers donated, desperate to see justice served. Within days, the amount had climbed to $1,700. By the night Virgil and Katie Starks were attacked in their farmhouse, it had soared past $7,000. In less than 2 weeks, the fund surpassed $10,000, the equivalent of more than $160,000 today. It wasn't just money. It was the town's grief, their fear, their determination to stop the Phantom. Every dollar pledged was a prayer, a plea that the nightmare would end. But detectives faced a troubling question. Was the Starks attack truly the work of the Phantom killer? The weapon was different. This time, a .22 caliber rifle. Some believed it was a copycat. Others insisted it was the same hand pulling the trigger. By late 1948, the official word came down. Authorities no longer considered the Starks case connected to the Lovers Lane murders. But in Texarkana, the people weren't so sure. To them, the lines blurred. All the bloodshed felt like the work of one faceless terror that had stolen their sense of safety forever. The brutal slaying of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore rattled Texarkana, but many still clung to the belief that it was an isolated tragedy. After all, the earlier attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry had never been publicly linked to the case. But when Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were murdered, everything changed. Two bright, church-going teenagers gunned down on a spring night. Betty Jo wasn't just any girl. She was a popular high school junior, a sorority member, an officer in the school band, a winner of countless academic and musical prizes, even a former Little Miss Texarkana. Her death sent shockwaves through the community. The grief was overwhelming. Her high school dismissed classes early so hundreds of classmates could attend her funeral. Parents pulled their children indoors. Businesses imposed curfews to keep the streets empty at night. It was then that the media gave the faceless predator a name that would forever haunt the town: the Phantom Killer. When Virgil Starks was gunned down in his own home, hysteria gripped Texarkana like never before. The papers warned the Phantom could strike anywhere, anytime, at anyone. Reports of prowlers flooded the police station. Officers admitted most were the result of fear, imagination, and sheer panic. But beneath the paranoia was a chilling truth. The Phantom was still out there. Before the murders, Texarkana was the kind of town where doors were left unlocked and windows wide open on warm nights. That all changed after the Phantom struck. Fear drove residents to transform their homes into fortresses. Doors were bolted shut, windows nailed down, sheets and blinds hastily thrown up to block the darkness outside. The day after Virgil Starks was gunned down in his own living room, hardware stores were stripped bare. Locks, guns, ammunition, window shades sold out in a matter of hours. Sales of door hooks, night latches, and makeshift window guards surged as the community armed itself against an unseen enemy. Texarkana became a powder keg. Nervous homeowners, weapons in hand, mistook shadows for intruders. Police officers learned to blare sirens and stand in their headlights when approaching a house, anything to avoid being gunned down by a terrified citizen. The paranoia spread far beyond Texarkana, gripping nearby towns like Hope, Lufkin, and Magnolia, even as far as Oklahoma City, where sales of guns and axes spiked. Weeks passed without another murder, and slowly, the panic began to fade. But for that summer of 1946, Texarkana was a city held hostage by fear. Every knock at the door, every creak in the night a reminder that the Phantom could strike again. As fear gripped Texarkana, rumors spread like wildfire. Every day brought new whispers. Someone claimed the Phantom had been caught. Another swore he was locked away in a secret jail. And still others believed he'd been whisked off to another county under the cover of night. The rumors became so rampant that they hindered the investigation itself. On April 18th, Texas Ranger Manuel "Lone Wolf" Gonzalez stood before reporters, pleading with the public to stop. He warned that wild speculation was not only distracting officers from real leads, it was also destroying the lives of innocent men accused of being the Phantom. Again, on May 7th, he took to the radio, reminding citizens, the people must not become so anxious to rid themselves of the killer that they brand innocent persons as the murderer. But the panic didn't stop. The Gazette and news offices were flooded with calls, local and long distance, desperate to know if the killer had finally been caught. Sheriff Presley himself had to beg the community for restraint, urging residents to remember their neighbor's innocence, until the true Phantom was found. Sadly, that day never came. Let's now talk about the killer. The killer who stalked Texarkana remained nameless through his first attacks. But after the brutal slayings of Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, the press gave him a chilling identity. On April 16, 1946, the Texarkana Daily News ran the headline, "Phantom Killer Eludes Officers as Investigation of Slayings Pressed." The following day, the Texarkana Gazette echoed the name with, "Phantom Slayer Still at Large." The label stuck. To a town gripped by fear, the faceless predator who struck without warning was now known as the Phantom Killer. Only two survivors, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, ever saw him closely enough to give a description. Both recalled a man about 6 feet tall, his face hidden by a crude white mask with holes cut for the eyes and mouth. But their accounts differed. Hollis believed he was a young, dark-tanned white man under 30. Larry, however, thought he was a light-skinned African-American. With no other surviving witnesses, the Phantom's true identity remains uncertain. Was it one man behind all the attacks, or more than one? Investigators could never say for certain, but one thing was clear. Texarkana's nightmare had a name, and he was still at large. To catch this monster, authorities began preparing a profile. Texas Ranger Manuel Gonzalez warned his men that they were facing a shrewd adversary, someone who left no stone unturned to hide his identity. Every move the Phantom made was precise, calculated, and baffling. "This is a cunning individual," Gonzalez said, "a man who will go to any length to avoid capture." At the Starks murder scene, Sheriff Presley echoed the same frustration. "This killer is the luckiest person I have ever known. No one sees him, no one hears him in time, and no one can identify him." Officers began to believe they were chasing not just a criminal, but a maniac, a gunman with deadly skill, striking in silence, then vanishing like a ghost. Survivor Jimmy Hollis put it bluntly, "I know he's crazy. The things he said, they made me feel his mind was warped." Psychologists were brought in to profile the killer. Dr. Anthony LaPalla, from the Federal Correctional Institution in Texarkana, believed the Phantom was methodical, planning his strikes with chilling foresight. He suggested all 5 murders were the work of the same man, a sadist in his late 30s to 50s, driven by a violent sexual compulsion. A man clever enough to blend into society, perhaps leading what looked like a normal life, while secretly feeding his obsession with death. LaPalla warned that the Phantom wasn't afraid of police patrols or roadblocks. Instead, he was adapting. When vacant lovers' lanes became too risky, he shifted his violence to a farmhouse. He might move to another town, another state, or he might suppress the urge, only to return again years later. To the citizens of Texarkana, the most terrifying part of LaPalla's assessment was this: the Phantom could be living among them, shopping in the same stores, eating in the same diners. By day, he was invisible. By night, he hunted. Police investigated around 400 suspects for this case. They received many false confessions as well. Investigators recall 9 people who confessed to being the Phantom but were caught when their statements didn't align with the facts. However, there was one suspect which many believe was the true Phantom. His name was Yael Swinney. Yael Swinney was no stranger to crime. At 29, he had already built a reputation as a car thief and counterfeiter. In July, police officer Max Tackett, who had been investigating a series of stolen vehicles, connected a crucial clue. On the very night of the Griffin Moore murders, one car had been stolen, while another, previously stolen, was mysteriously abandoned. Tracking the lead, Tackett arrested Swinney's wife, Peggy, when she returned to collect the abandoned vehicle. What Peggy revealed would send shockwaves through the investigation. In chilling detail, she confessed that her husband was the Phantom killer and that he was responsible for the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin. Investigators managed to verify parts of her story. She described the locations where Yael had discarded a victim's belongings, and police confirmed her claims. The pieces began to fit, and suspicion closed tightly around Swinney. But Peggy's testimony was far from stable. Her story shifted in several interviews. Detectives suspected she was terrified of her husband or afraid of incriminating herself. Eventually, she recanted her confession, and because of spousal privilege, she couldn't be forced to testify against him. For 6 months, law enforcement tried to tie Swinney to the murders, chasing every lead. But in the end, the case fell apart. On the night of the Booker Martin killings, it was discovered the couple had been sleeping under a bridge near San Antonio. Without hard evidence, prosecutors never charged Swinney with murder. Instead, he was convicted as a habitual offender for car theft and sentenced to prison. Some investigators later admitted this was essentially a plea deal in disguise. Swinney himself feared a murder trial could end in the death penalty, and in a strange twist, he even tried to plead guilty to the theft charge, though the law required a jury trial. Despite never standing trial for the Phantom murders, Many in law enforcement remain convinced Yoel Swinney was the Phantom Killer who terrorized Texarkana. Another strange twist in the Phantom investigation came with Ralph Bauman, a 21-year-old ex-Army Air Force machine gunner. On the very day of the Starks murder, Bauman claimed he awoke from a fugue state that had lasted for weeks, his rifle missing. Terrified, he said he'd heard about a suspect matching his own description. Convinced he was fleeing from murder, Bauman hitchhiked all the way to Los Angeles. On May 23rd, he walked into a police station and confessed, "I think I might be the Phantom. I'm my own suspect." Detectives quickly arrested him. But when Texas Ranger Manuel "Lone Wolf" Gonzalez examined his story, it began to crumble. Bauman claimed he'd been discharged from the military for being psychoneurotic and even admitted to killing 3 people in Texarkana within 3 days. But none of it matched the timeline of the actual murders. What sounded like a shocking confession turned out to be nothing more than another false lead. Apart from Swinney and Bauman, investigators had several significant leads. For starters, police clung to the hope that Betty Jo Booker's missing saxophone might provide the break they desperately needed. Days after her murder, a suspicious man in Corpus Christi tried to sell a saxophone at a music store. When pressed with questions, he bolted. Police arrested him and discovered a bag of bloody clothing in his hotel room. For a moment, it seemed like they had their Phantom. But after days of interrogation, the man was cleared. 6 months later, Booker's saxophone was finally found, tossed into the underbrush near her body. He wasn't the only suspect. On May 8th, authorities announced they were looking for an escaped German prisoner of war, 24 years old, stocky, with brown hair and blue eyes. He had stolen a car and tried to purchase ammunition in nearby towns. But just as quickly as he appeared on their radar, he vanished into thin air. Other possibilities emerged. A gun-toting hitchhiker boasted about killing 5 people in Texarkana, even naming Martin and Booker, before threatening another man. But detectives dismissed him, pointing out that the real Phantom had gone to great lengths to hide his identity, while this braggart practically advertised himself. And in Oklahoma, a violent drifter broke into a woman's home, claiming he had already killed 3 or 4 people and planned to kill again. A massive manhunt followed, with 20 officers and 160 residents scouring the area. A suspect was arrested 2 days later, but investigators concluded he too could not have been the Phantom. False leads, imposters, and drifters, each one raising hopes, only to collapse under scrutiny. And all the while, the real Phantom remained in the shadows. Texarkana never forgot the spring of 1946. In less than 3 months, 5 lives were stolen, 3 more were left scarred forever, and the town was gripped by a fear unlike anything it had ever known. The Phantom Killer seemed to strike at will, always vanishing back into the darkness, leaving behind only questions, whispers, and shattered lives. Despite dozens of suspects, countless interrogations, and an investigation that spanned both Texas and Arkansas, the killer was never caught. Over the years, theories have multiplied, some pointing to Yoel Swinney, others to drifters, soldiers, or even conspiracies. Yet the truth remains buried, locked away with the shadows of that night. The Phantom left no calling card, no confession, no justice for the families of his victims. Only fear, rumors, and an enduring mystery. Nearly 80 years later, the case still lingers, part crime, part legend. And in Texarkana, when the sun goes down and the streets grow quiet, some still wonder, is the Phantom Killer gone? Or is he still out there, hiding in the dark? Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to get more true crime stories in the future. Until next time.